In these videos, I'm trying to walk the listener all the way back to the skinniest end of the wedge along which the mischief to which we're subjected grows fat, back to the first prerequisite for the acceptance of the maladaptive conditioning that's been administered through captured institutions and mass media. The aim is to expose and destroy the foundational delusion upon which the ability to be disconnected from truth is predicated, and by extension, to nullify belief in the dross that's been heaped upon it. And that foundational delusion is far older than the modern world that exploits it. It's as old as our ability to judge the world to be wanting. The foundational delusion that allows us to hide from the truth is the identification with the body and root thought I, from which grows the conditioned lens of conceptual self through which reality is perceived, albeit distorted, hemmed to appearing only relative to ideas, and thus stripped of the nourishing light of the absolute truth. In this regard, humans are like mushrooms, needing the solid food of acquisition and experience to be present, rather than having a direct appetite for the nourishing light of the truth of this moment, regardless of its mundanity. In unconsciousness, that nourishment is not known for what it is, but is instead attributed to the object of desire, so long as its novelty persists. So in your waking state, your connection to the present is mediated by a buffer of ideas, your conditioned mind, your karma, as ideas are the seeds of action, and your grasp on the truth of this moment is only as solid as their coincidental overlap with reality, which, if you consider all the unknowns about which there is bound to be speculation, such as what you think other people think, it's tenuous at best. Your grasp. You can be only partially right in all your views and speculations, and even then only fleetingly so. So the person who operates in the delusion of body identification and through the lens of conditioning, their grasp on the truth is like that of a person's hand on an eel. The few of you who have foolishly grappled with a freshwater eel will know the impossibility of which I speak. That mediating layer of conditioning, so long as there is identification with it and the body it points to as self, it will act as would that layer of slime that so effectively stops a hand from gaining purchase on the body of an eel. The emotional distortions caused by the delusion of identification with forms both gross and subtle in the face of threat and contradiction, respectively, preclude the perception of the truth's bounty, which eclipses the product of all that the mind can promise. What it delivers, what the mind delivers, is only net of the parasite's energetic cut, and it's distorted by the fear for the form it purports to serve, which is more to the parasite's liking in terms of its vibrational level. Were I to explain my view of how we got here amongst all this seemingly manufactured crisis, I'd say it's rooted in conditioning, which is the most controllable thing that influences people's behavior, the sum of which creates society and the arc of human history. People have been shaped into something that will agree with, or at least tolerate, the status quo in which we find ourselves. Each generation seems to die in a world the prospect of which they would not have tolerated from behind the lens of conditioning they were given by their formative years. But that reality they see in their dying years it's one that's tolerable for the generation who spent their formative years steeping in it. Each generation is conditioned to tolerate less freedom of speech, less freedom of conscience, less freedom of association, self-protection, commerce, and movement, in the way that some wild fowl was ultimately conditioned into becoming a chicken that can be perpetually exploited. Free shit comes at a cost. In the aggregate, people don't change, and so when we compare one generation to another, we're just comparing the circumstances that shape them into what they are. So the choice is to either guard the senses by somehow being separated from the popular culture and the channels through which it is administered, or live in the society but as one who is not identified with the impressions in consciousness born of experience. That identification with the whole tree of conditioning is predicated on the identification with the root thought I, to which all thoughts relate. And so to be one who is unmoved by the conditions of the world, that identification must be broken through the experiential exposure of its object's non-self nature, to surrender that I back to the spiritual heart from which it arose in the child before words, upon the discovery of duality, the belief in duality. When people use curse words, it's often a reflection of their limited vocabulary, and such is the case with what I'm about to say, because I have no word for this other than fuckery. The video linked in the description describes the type of real and theoretical fuckery of which I speak, and spirituality is really the only defense for it at the individual level, to either guard the senses or escape the delusion that gives conditioning traction over the emotions. Emotional intelligence and spiritual development are everything in terms of judging the danger presented by a person. Emotional intelligence is expressed in how well a person manages their emotions in the face of stressors, and spiritual development is a function of the degree to which a person's perspective aligns with the truth of this moment, how they're not subject to delusion, and this is evidenced in equanimity and the peace they radiate. Unless one has encountered such a being and were present enough to perceive their aura, it's possible to be tricked by someone who can parrot sacred teachings. And this is why spiritual aspirants are taken in by gurus and cults, because ideas are accepted on a first come, first served basis, and the belief in practically any idea can be established through repeated exposure to it. But spiritual development provides protection against brainwashing, since by definition it is alignment with truth, and you can't be brainwashed into the truth. Coming into the truth is the liberation from delusion, which is a falling away process and not an additive one. And coming into truth doesn't mean knowing all the true facts of things and having all the right beliefs. It means perceiving creations unfolding, fully apart from the perceptual influence of ideas about how it should be, could be, or should have been relative to some physical and conceptual self appearing in the awareness one is. Spiritual development allows for the perceiving of delusion, both in others and in one's own past perspectives upon reflection. It's like a two-way mirror that once exposed can't be forgotten. Delusion is evidenced in the unconscious playing along with a fictional narrative that's being passed off as reality via astroturfing. There's a world in the mind of a deluded person that was strategically implanted through mass conditioning, the placement of formations in consciousness that influence human behavior the way boulders can predictably influence the flow of water in a river. The absolute gullibility of consciousness makes its expression uniform, holding constant all conditions. It's somewhat predictable how people may behave in the aggregate. And this also reveals the folly of judging others, because if we count the full scope of the factors that give rise to their decisions and deeds, and apply every single one of them to our circumstance, which would mean the experiencing of every moment in the exact same way as them up to that decision point, we would be them, and any variation in decision at a given intersection would then be a function of probability, for which no credit can be assigned but to the will that decides which side of the coin faces up at the toss's conclusion. And that's all for now.